We did the 16-day trip, including Ollantaytambo, Machu Picchu, the Sacred Valley. It's very interesting that there was once a worldwide network of pyramids really all around the world on the continental land masses, and as you guys said, underwater as well. That can't be a coincidence. So this worldwide network of pyramids which shows that there was a very high culture on this planet that was very sophisticated. Remember about a year ago they did some sonar scanning of the Great Pyramid and found new chambers right above the Grand Gallery, and that is the internal structure of the Great Pyramid is equally as impressive as the structure itself. As we said, there are underwater ruins. There are these megalithic buildings all around the world that still defy our building practices today, including 30-foot sarcophaguses in Egypt. Why would you have to build so big just to put a regular sized human in there? The largest megalithic constructions are actually called Cyclopean. Cyclops was the one-eyed giant of ancient Greek lore. So they even attribute the building of these massive megalithic structures to giants themselves. We went to a museum where there was one of the elongated skulls on display, and it was mummified, and it was ritually killed. It was a child. The head was as large as a torso. In the 19th century and even in the 20th century, you can find article after article in local newspapers, even all the way up to the New York Times, describing 8-foot, 9-foot, 12-foot giants being discovered in these mounds. You can't do anything to create a larger cranial capacity. And these, they call them cone heads, which extend out the back of the cranium, have 30% more cranium capacity. To introduce giants would really, we'd have to redefine history. When you go to a location, you really start to pick up a lot more information than you could just reading everything on the subject and talking to people at the sites. And I always recommended people go out there and see for themselves.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Edge of Wonder, and we're really excited right now. We're actually at DisclosureCon in Pine Top, Arizona, and we have a very special guest for you guys, Brad Olsen, who is an award-winning book writer. He's a book publisher, he's a travel writer, he's also an event producer, so many different things that Brad has been involved with, and most recently went on a trip
to Antarctica.
Oh my gosh, and we're going to be talking to him today about all of that. And
Antarctica, South America.
All kinds of stuff. It's
Skinwalker Ranch even.
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff. So Brad, it's awesome to have you on the show. We were really looking forward to this for a long time, so it's just great to have you here.
Thanks guys, a real pleasure to finally meet you and have this conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
Why don't you tell us a little bit, like some of the folks out there might not be familiar with you, so tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'd like to get into what in the world transpired in that head of yours to make you go to Antarctica. Yeah.
So I taught English in Japan in the early 90s. I self-financed a 3-year trip around the world. That's when I started writing travel books. Travel went through a bit of a metamorphosis around year 2000 with the advent of the internet, so I had an existential crisis whether I was going to stay in publishing and stay as a writer. So I transitioned into esoteric subjects, something I'm very interested in, many subjects of your guys' shows. And I already had an author, Lon Milo Duquette, did a book called The Key to Solomon's Key, and later on I would sign Leo Lyons-Agami to do 5 books with CCC Publishing, that's my publishing company. And then I came out with Future Esoteric and Modern Esoteric, and I'm now working on the 3rd and final in this series called Beyond Esoteric. And travel really was the linchpin for bringing many of these subjects together. Because when you go to a location, you really start to pick up a lot more information than you could just reading everything on the subject and talking to people at the sites. I did a series on sacred places, guidebooks, and I always recommended people go out there and see for themselves. And that was really the impetus for doing the 4 months in South Africa with the 26-day sailing trip down to Antarctica.
Well, I guess before we go into Antarctica, Tell us a little bit about your South Africa trip and what
It was South America?
South America,
Yeah.
sorry, your South America trip and what you were, like, what was the purpose of it and what were you doing there?
Well, those are the last 2 continents of the world I had visited. So now I'm in the 7-continent club, but that wasn't the real reason I wanted to go. I wanted to go because I had a great opportunity of joining Nassim Haramein and Brian Forrester. We're doing a tour of Peru and Bolivia to go to all the megalithic sites and understand that there's a new way of viewing how these blocks were transported and fit into place. Because you never see any chisel marks. That's what's really curious about the megaliths in Peru. And we had this great opportunity to go with the Resonance Academy and all the delegates that came from around the world, mostly the US. And we were going from site to site, and sometimes the regular archaeologists would be talking about how the Incas built everything, and then Brian and Nassim were saying, oh, no, this is pre-Incan, this is very, very old, predates everything. So it just goes to show that there are 2 sides to every story. And Emily, my partner, and I, we purchased a vehicle in Santiago, Chile. We drove all the way up through Chile to Peru to meet them in Cuzco. We did the 16-day trip, including Ollantaytambo, Machu Picchu, the Sacred Valley. Oh, we were just getting it all. 5 sites a day sometimes. It really was. And really made great friends with Nassim and Brian and all the other delegates on the trip. The trip started to break up. Some people left after Peru was done. A few kept going on to Bolivia along with us. And then after Lake Titicaca, we were alone again in the vehicle driving due south. Thousands of kilometers, all the way down the whole spine, Bolivia and Argentina to get to Ushuaia. And that is where 90% of all the boat traffic leaves for Antarctica. We got there without any reservations, without knowing anything, and in the middle of high season. So people were saying in the tourist office, oh, this is the worst time to show up and try to get a trip. But we were persistent enough and found out that there was another harbor outside of where all the cruise ships go, which was the yacht harbor. And there was one spot open on one boat, but it was a smaller boat, and I'm a tall guy. I would have to be ducking all over, and I couldn't leave Emily behind. So we just kept persisting, and it turns out the boat we had to walk over to go to the one we interviewed on was the boat we went. And it was called Chief One out of Gdansk, Poland. Turned out to be 11 Poles and 3 Americans for 26 days across the Drake Passage there and back, which are the roughest seas in the world. And we did get violently ill.
I was going to say, so because they're Polish, was the language of barf enough for you to communicate with one another? Because there must have been some throwing up on that trip.
Oh, it was horrific. Emily may give you a short interview about it later at the conference. And
Looking forward to that.
I heard part of her story, and man, that sounded really rough.
Yeah, I think I lost about 20 to 25 pounds on that trip.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an instant weight loss program for any of your viewers out there.
Yeah.
So before we dive right into Antarctica, you were explaining the pyramids and everything else and how these were not chiseled. What's your understanding of how all of these are built? And the other thing I found really fascinating is we're just, we've been researching this for a long time, but I find that how all of these ruins all over the world, all these pyramids are very similar in style. And it's kind of interesting how it's like, wait, how this long ago are the same techniques being used?
Well, and not only that, but even we just did an episode on underwater cities that were found, and there is a pyramid in China, which is very similar to the pyramid in
Egypt.
Egypt. Well, no, that one. But
in the
Mayan.
Chichen Itza.
Yeah. So, even the style of stone and those things seem to be similar. So, do you think that these are connected? And what's your take on it?
It's very interesting that there was once a worldwide network of pyramids really all around the world on the continental land masses, and as you guys said, underwater as well. And I think you may be referring to the Cuban underwater site between Yucatan and Cuba, and I have pictures of it in my book, Modern Esoteric, of the side sonar scan, and it looks just like a Mayan city above water. That can't be a coincidence.
No,
and I'm showing some slides from Google Earth of Antarctica, which also look like pyramid sites, step pyramids, much like the Zoser pyramid in Egypt or some of the other pyramids such as Chichen Itza in Central America. There are step pyramids in Peru and Bolivia, right near Titicaca at Pumapunku, and Tiwanaku have step pyramids that are partly reconstructed, and there are also pyramids down near Lima, Peru. So this worldwide network of pyramids, which I researched in my book, Sacred Places Around the World, shows that there was a very high culture on this planet that was very sophisticated and built these incredible monuments with a huge amount of labor force that must have gone into it to create these monuments. Now, I've been to the Great Pyramid in Egypt. In fact, I climbed to the top of it on the full moon, 1993. It's not allowed.
Yeah.
Youthful indiscretion, guys. I'm not recommending it to your crowd. I don't want you to get demonetized by me saying
Did you? Well, wait. Did you get caught?
Did not.
All right.
Pulled it off.
Man.
Because I knew there's a little trick of the eye. When lights come on real bright, you don't focus right away. So they were doing the sound and light show with the Sphinx, and I was walking around the pyramid. At one point, I was kind of sitting on the pyramid and I got shouted down. And I was almost about to leave. I got to the part where I was just about to head back down the hill, and the sound and light show came on. And I looked around, there was no guards, and I just started scrambling. They're about as big as a washing machine, and I got long legs, so I'm just like scrambling up and up and up. And then the lights came on again, and I hid in the shadow and then went down. It took me 3 episodes like that to get to the top.
Wow.
And it's amazing once you're up there.
That must be. You can see everything from up there.
Cairo, the Sahara, the blackness of the Sahara in one direction, and then all the lights of Cairo in the other, and the River Nile down the river.
How tall is it?
It's about 30, 35 stories tall. Yeah.
And you scaled that whole thing?
Well, it's just climbing blocks. There was no...
But still, 35 stories. I mean, it's hard enough stairs.
Yeah.
So 35-story stairs, I know how tired I am after 5. So you're climbing blocks. You must have been in pretty good shape at that point, huh?
Pretty good shape, yeah. And then when you get to the top, it's the capstone's missing. It's about as big as this room, around, flat. And I saw a mouse appear.
No way!
Really?
So then he must have gotten up there from somewhere.
Have no idea.
Climb everything, right?
I thought it was quite peculiar. I'll never forget it.
That is really weird, because you would think what food would, like, how, like, why would a mouse be on
No,
top?
dude, there has to have been some exit close to the top and it's climbing up. I mean, that's the only explanation.
Really
That's bizarre.
interesting.
I wonder if he enjoyed the view like you did.
I'm sure he did. Hoping I would maybe give him some morsels to eat, yeah. But remember, about a year ago, they did some sonar scanning of the Great Pyramid and found new chambers that have as yet been detected.
What did they had a very specific word for it. I can't remember. It was like a, not a cavity, but it was something very, they didn't want to say a chamber, so they used this like void. That was it. They called it this void that's inside the pyramid.
Right above the Grand Gallery, and that is the internal structure of the Great Pyramid is equally as impressive as the structure itself. Very finely cut granite and these notches
and not easy to cut. I mean, granite is not easy to cut. Like that's one of the things I think people don't understand, especially about how like tight the pyramid is built and all of that stuff. Like that technology is very, very hard to come by even now, right?
Oh yeah. And then they found the casing stones, which were buried under the sand, and you cannot even fit a piece of paper or a credit card. Same thing in Peru. We tried at many of the megalithic sites with Nassim, trying to put a piece of paper or a credit card in there, and not even close.
It's the same thing with the Mayans too. I mean, I climbed Coba a couple years ago, and it's about 150 feet high, and it's the same thing. You can see you can actually see all of the other Mayan cities on the top of Cobal, and it's just, and then they all kind of line up, and there was these roads that connected them back in the day, and it's just like, how in the world were they, because they, you know, if you think about it, there's no cars. How did they actually were able to line all of these up and do all, it's just amazing, you know, it really is. So, but what's your understanding on who built all of these?
In my book, Modern Esoteric, I outline a case for antediluvian civilizations being on this planet long before Sumer and the Egyptian civilizations arose. As we said, there are underwater ruins there are these megalithic buildings all around the world that still defy our building practices today. For example, in Baalbek, Lebanon, are some of the largest cut stones in the world. The largest cranes in the world today would struggle to put those in place, let alone place them perfectly at the temple there at Baalbek. So we're still wondering how it got done.
That's interesting.
One of the episodes of Ancient Aliens I appeared on, I spoke about auditive levitation. And to answer your question, how these massive blocks could have been moved, you can match the frequency harmonics of matter. For example, an opera singer can shatter a glass with her voice. There's no projectile hitting it, it's just the frequency and vibration of that voice. So if you can match the same frequency and vibration of a large megalithic block, you can conceivably move it over water, move it up high distances, and even move it into place. Once it's in place, then you have to get that exact fit. And in Peru and Bolivia, all over the place, you just see these most unusual fits.
Yeah.
They're not just straight block fits, they're curving, and each one of them fits so perfectly together, which does make them earthquake proof, but it would also be so much harder to do that. And so Brian Forrester and Nassim Harriman were proposing that there was a technique using cold plasma technology to soften the rocks. And indeed, in several locations, including Ollantaytambo, you see what look like trowel marks on the stone. Somebody was just working the stone while it was soft, and then it dried. That also explains how you get those little knobs that come out and the marshmallowing. The gravity would make the stones heavier at the bottom, and that's where they bulge out. So it does look like they were in a semi-fluid or soft and malleable state where they could have been shaped like that.
Well, and then that would make more sense for how the setting gets it so a paper can't fit between the blocks, right? So that's really interesting.
Yes.
I'd never heard that particular. I actually saw that episode of Ancient Aliens. Actually, when I even think I messaged you after it. I saw it and I took a photo of you and I was like, oh crap, that's Brad on Ancient Aliens. And, yeah, it was really cool.
So, well, we've been researching a lot of giants and, you know, all of these different things in the past as well. Do you think, like, giants could have any play? And, you know, because, I mean, for giants, if you're like a, you know, 15,
yeah, those blocks are much less large.
It'd just be like us picking up a brick, really, in a way, you know? I mean, do you think that, and also, I forget which pyramid it is, but there looks like a doorway that's like 30 feet high. And, like, why would you build a doorway that's 30 feet high unless it's, like, possibly for a bigger, large being?
My lectures at Contact in the Desert and other conferences last year was on the subject of giants, including 30-foot sarcophaguses in Egypt. Why would you have to build so big just to put a regular size human in there? But on the subject of construction, the largest megalithic constructions are actually called Cyclopean. Cyclops was the one-eyed giant of ancient Greek lore. So they even attribute the building of these massive megalithic structures to giants themselves. And indeed, when we were in the Sacred Valley, we went to a museum where there was one of the elongated skulls on display, and it was mummified, and it was ritually killed. It was a child. The head was as large as a torso.
No way! Wow. This is a child?
This is a child.
Why is no one talking about this, Brad?
Exactly. Well, we are.
But I mean, you know, you have to come to, you know, your books or you know, hopefully an episode of Ancient Aliens or even Edge of Wonder to see that. Why? Like, that's massive. Like,
it rewrites history.
It does, incredibly.
Well, and I think this is what, you know, if you're an ancient historian from, you know, 50 years ago and you wrote books about it, now all of a sudden things are coming out, and you've already set the standard. This is what's being taught in schools and everything else. I mean, you're probably not going to want to edit all of this stuff. You're not going to say, oh, I was wrong, and so instead it's almost easier to deny all of this stuff.
Right.
And these people still take the credit on the mainstream society for what's really going on. I mean, it seems like that's kind of really what's going on.
That is what's going on. And right here in North America, we have what's called Smithsonian Gate, where a lot of research was being done when they were pulling out the mounds in the Midwest where I'm from. I remember as a kid going to Devil's Lake, and there'd be the effigy mounds and legends of lost civilizations, of the mound builder race. Well, when they're pulling them out in the 19th century and even in the 20th century, you can find article after article in local newspapers, even all the way up to the New York Times, describing 8-foot, 9-foot, 12-foot giants being discovered in these mounds. And Smithsonian would come in like the FBI saying, we'll take over here, and sending those academics home. One of the most famous sites was at Lake Delavan, southern Wisconsin, a place I know very well. I grew up about 100 miles from there. And they were finding these giants. Smithsonian came in, say, we're just going to take over this dig. They took all the stuff out of there. When the archaeologists went to say, hey, what about the stuff we found? We don't know anything about that. It's just gone. So there are even rumors that they just dumped it in the Atlantic just to get it out of sight, out of mind. Which is
what they didn't need, probably, because there must be a bunch. Now, let me ask you a question. Smithsonian has often come up in the discussions between Ben and I as being behind this, just like you're talking about. Who's behind the Smithsonian, in your opinion? Of course, we understand why they're doing it. It's because it would rewrite history. It would introduce people to a potential chance of there being divinity out there. And I think a lot of the history and culture out there is now trying to teach people science, science, science. So, but who's behind the Smithsonian? Why do this?
Well, they've been around for 200 years or so, and they have been the authority on American history. I've been to the Smithsonian Museum on the Mall in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
And it's the cookie cutter version of history. To introduce giants would really upset the apple cart, so to speak.
Yeah, it would throw a whole...
Yeah, we'd have to redefine history.
Yeah, totally.
And think about it, in the 19th century, everybody was very religious. Surprisingly, they were even more open to the idea of giants being a part of American prehistory than they are today. It seems around the 1950 mark, all mention of it just went away.
Well, I mean, even if you look, and not just Christianity, you look at other religions too, they do talk about giants in a lot of different religions and cultures. And so
well, and also on some of the boat trips that came over from Europe, they were finding giants. They were bringing them onto their boats to try to take them back to Europe. Their carcasses were smelling so terrible they would have to throw them in the ocean on the way. I mean, can you imagine a rotting giant? Like, can't be good. But I mean, that's really, you know, these were some of the explorers, the first explorers finding this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm. And we went to southern Patagonia on our drive down. We just happened into this town called San Julian, and that's where Magellan wintered in the year 1520. In fact, this is the 500th anniversary of Magellan discovering the Magellan Straits, which separate southern Patagonia and Terra del Fuego, which we had to take a ferry over and back, getting down to Ushuaia. And indeed, in Magellan's historical ledgers, they were meeting men twice the size of them, that they were looking at the hips of these Patagonian giants, which were quite infamous to all the mariners that would go through there. They were called the Fueguean Indians, and they're all but extinct today.
That's amazing. I actually had no idea you were such, you know, you had so much information on giants. That's great, because we've been passing the idea back and forth about doing episodes on giants, and it's such a difficult subject to get your head around.
Yeah.
It has to do with very esoteric histories and a lot of the local cultures, and it's very difficult to...
Well, and as like through our research, you know, people are saying, oh, here's like a photo of these giants, but then we started looking into it and we started realizing, oh, man, a lot of these seem, like some of them seem legit photos, but majority of them that we're looking at seem to be,
you know,
fake. And it's like, we 100% believe that there are giants. But it's just like, we have to look at everything very subjectively, just like because you find something in a photo, it's like, oh, here's evidence. But when we started looking back at it, it's like, man, this really looks like it was photoshopped, or this is here. And, you know, and then because you have the other side that wants to put out fake things out there, so then they can debunk it later. And so we have to be mindful of that in both cases.
Absolutely. So. In the case of, say, UFO sightings, all we need is one verified account to be the big game changer in the whole scenario of visitation. Same thing with giants. In Paracas, Peru, they have a display of the elongated skulls. In my talk on the giants, I explained that You cannot wrap a head, you can't put boards on it, you can't do anything to create a larger cranial capacity. And these, they call them cone heads, which extend out the back of the cranium, have 30% more cranium capacity. You can't mold a skull that way and gain capacity. You can just shape it in
But
different
can
ways.
you guys imagine trying to walk with a head like that?
Well, if your body is bigger.
That's right.
I guess.
Bigger head, bigger
that's-
body.
So your
that's
neck
it.
must be jacked.
Otherwise, you'd have this like tiny head and then this big
I'm
body.
gonna have to
walking
draw a
around.
picture of what this looks like. 'Cause, yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So
Yeah,
that's
it really
amazing,
is.
all of this stuff. And it's also amazing how, you know, one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about too when it comes to Antarctica, we haven't kind of gone in there yet, but is Dr. Sala is often talking about how there are these elongated skull beings apparently in stasis in Antarctica and some of these bases there.